Hello, and welcome back to It's All Interesting with your host, me, Clifford Merin, and my guest today, Raoul Davis, CEO of Ascendant Group Marketing. Raoul, so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the pod.
It's my pleasure to be here.
How are you doing today, Raoul?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. All right. So, Raul, before we get into everything, give us a little bit about your background, about Ascendance Group background, and all that.
Sure. So I finished high school with a whopping 1.9 GPA. So let's not say I was an overachiever. But my first year in college, my dad said, if you don't get a 3.0 your freshman year, there won't be a year two. So I magically got a 3.0. So I started my journey then into student leadership as well. And I had the opportunity to bring in the hip hop artist KRS-One for a speaking engagement. We got 1,100 students there. And then I said to the speakers bureau we were working with, I love what you do. Do you guys have any internships? They said, no. I said, well, can you give me one anyway? So I started booking speakers for them at universities across the country, got really good at it. When I was getting ready to finish grad school at University of Delaware, two of the clients from the agency reached out to me and they said, we love what you do. Why don't you start your own company? We'll become your first two clients. So Ascendant was born in 2004 as a speaker
Hmm.
management agency. It took us about 2 years to figure out it was our popularity of our brand that determined how much they spoke. So we got into the world of personal branding, focusing on book deals and PR. Eventually in 2009, we had more CEO and executive clients come in, and that's where we've been focused the last 15 years is CEO branding. So it's
Hmm.
all about business isn't just B2B or B2C, but it's H to H, human to human. So how do you develop an emotional connection
Yeah.
for our brand?
Well, let me ask you something about that because I was thinking about this before we came on and writing a couple of notes to myself. So much of what we see now on social media is about people, individuals that are not really affiliated with anything, just trying to build their own brand, right? And then you have companies that are trying to worst word exploit, right, to not exploit but to try to capitalize on that
Mhm.
and help people build their brand. They charge money and then all the whole system works. Is there a point, do you think we are so in deep in our social media lives that there's this, the personal brand has been oversaturated almost in the market?
The issue is the motivation for
Mm,
people, right? Like for with our clients, we always say it's not about ego, it's about effectiveness. It happens to be the case that corporate logos are about 160 years old, but this person to person interaction has been around since humanity began. So,
mhm.
and we all have two choices, as one of my mentor, Chris Collins, teaches. You can get branded or you can get labeled. So, are you going to build a brand by design or let it happen to you? So, I think that for those who are truly trying to push a product or a service because they think it makes the world better, it's an important thing, right? And I was to say that branding is the ultimate journey in personal development, right? Because you have to believe things that really are true about you, but sometimes we get imposter syndrome. Now, for those who maybe too easily believe it and they are all sizzle without the steak, yes, it's a problem. And
Mm,
it ends up being a challenge because people want to take the shortcuts, right? And unfortunately, on some of the social platforms, especially Instagram, for instance, you have some great photos. You take some pictures with some celebrities. You can just build a facade, right? And
mhm,
so, if you're asking me if there's a lack of substance, there is. And
mhm.
it is a challenge, but that's why people are so skeptical these days, right? Like we've basically have become more skeptical for our own survival. Think about how much information we're hit with. If we were not so skeptical, we would all just fall for it.
Mm, mm. And in terms of, you mentioned logos. What is it in your industry that people see a logo and it makes them feel something comfortable or familiar? What is it about it that gives it that effect, that something that maybe you can't even put it into words necessarily, but you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So in your experience, you go to the grocery store, right? You see a Kellogg's logo or you see a newer logo, right? Kellogg's is doing that because they know they're gonna get the business that way. So give us a little insight into that world.
So ironically, a logo rarely actually does that by itself. It's
Hmm.
more so the story and the meaning behind it, right? Like that Nike swoosh is designed to be active and is designed to, you're a runner, you have activity, you're in motion, right? So it is or you could also see it as a check mark, meaning you're trying to get something done, right? So it has a lot of different meaning to somebody. So it's not always that the logo's very pretty or it's got nice letters, this and that, but it's how someone contextualizes it for themselves or the story they were told about it, and then they see it for themselves.
Okay. You were saying that in terms of a story, right? People are looking at a story behind
Yes.
the logo.
Correct. Yeah, that's the driver. There are some logos that are so artistic it just captures your imagination, but that's rare. That's like
Mhm.
1% of logos, right? The meaning behind it is what people connect with.
So you've been doing this since 2004 and probably earlier than that, since your college days. This may sound like a question that you probably get all the time, but how really has the marketing industry changed in those 20 years, right? I mean, it sounds like you and I are about the same age. We were in college
Yeah.
around the same time. And I remember the first time I logged into Facebook, right? And that was like, what, what is this? I can tell what classes people are going to, right? I can see who's at my school, but it was really just so school centered. And now we see what it is now as just as an example. So beyond social media, obviously I know you're going to say that, but beyond social media, how has the marketing industry changed in terms of targeting and other type of efforts over those 20 years period that you've been involved?
So the entry level to it is so much lower, right? Now, if you basically have $7, you can do a Facebook ad. Right? So like access to people has changed the most. And because of that, it means we get more messages than we ever had before. And so it means that by design, our attention spans have gotten shorter. It used to be 3 minutes for Americans. Now it's down to 45 seconds. So now you
That seems
have
like a lot also, right?
that's a big
40.
well, yeah, yeah, but so that's the average span. But to your point, a lot of times you've got to do something great in the first 7 seconds to even earn the 45 seconds,
Mm,
right? So that's the difference is that it's so flooded. Your ability to one have clarity is more important, right? Like if you're doing some sort of message, if you have a paragraph to begin with, forget it. You better have one sentence, one headline out the gate that captures people so that they read that paragraph, right? And then you also have to be patient. You have to be willing to realize people have to see messages multiple times and people are going to again be skeptical. So you have to earn trust. You are not given it. It used to be the case that marketers started with trust because they were they had spent enough money to be on TV or they had spent enough money. So it meant that you had a certain stature out the gate, right? And there were
mm.
less messages, so you trusted them more. But because the marketplace is so flooded, the filtering is higher.
And that's what I think I meant before in terms of the oversaturation, right?
Yes.
Because now we've all been conditioned to see, oh, well, this person has a video, this person has a video, this person has a video. What is it in your mind? And I know you mentioned the 7 seconds. What it has to be in those 7 seconds that can get somebody to connect with somebody. And maybe that's a secret of the trade,
No,
right?
no, you got
But
two.
yeah.
You got two routes you can go. You either say something that's so shocking, a person just can't turn their head away from it, right? So that's one way. But I think the better way is to be relatable within those 7 seconds. So I always say like an unobjectively true statement, right? Like you can't object to it. It's something about life that people connect with. Like on LinkedIn, if someone says CEOs are busier than ever, like, okay, it's not really something anyone can disagree. So you're typically going to get the next sentence
Hmm.
or so because of that, right? So you can either have something that's going to be highly agreeable or something that's going to be highly shocking. Both, I think those are the two shortest paths. There are other ways, but I think those are the two shortest paths.
Hmm. In terms of AI and ChatGPT and these new systems that people can tool around with, has that short circuited certain things, or has, just like you said, anybody can put a video out there, but you still have to put in the work, I would think, to just gain that following, right? Because anybody can put something out there, but it's really about is there a consistency, number one? And then number two, has AI and ChatGPT created more work for people to do because you have to be able to set yourself apart even more so, even when you have tools like this.
Yeah, so it's gonna make marketing worse, and then it will make marketing better. So at first, people are just going to use the tool and crank out more content and not use it to the maximum degree. So garbage in, garbage out. And then what will happen is people will begin to recognize, oh, that's Chat GPT language, or that's
Right.
Gemini language, right? So then what it forces people to do is to begin using like the widget features on ChatGPT and actually feed it enough information that it actually does sound like you and your organization, and you're just able to crank that content out
Mm.
more, and then you refine it, right? And then at that point, marketing gets better because the person who only had time to do 6 social posts a month now can do 18, and we're at a higher quality. So
Mm.
eventually it will improve the marketplace, but we'll go through some time period in which it will just make the clutter worse.
So I know we had spoken a couple of weeks ago, and you said you were traveling internationally, and your business is all over the world. What is it about the American consumer that is so different from everywhere else in the world?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. One, we tend to want things more and faster, and we're we tend to be willing to put debt on faster than many other people in the world. So that's one. Number two, I do think that we are oversaturated more than any other part of the world too. So I mean, I think those are two of the main differences. And yeah, I was in Dubai a few weeks ago. We were celebrating our 20th anniversary there as a business, and when I talk to CEOs about their brand and kind of what they're seeing in the marketplace for their companies, the biggest thing they're curious about is, how does the brand exist when you're not in the room? Right.
Mm.
And so if you're an individual, a CEO, an entrepreneur, an executive, we've all had that conversation where we connected with someone, but then they took it to the committee. And you're not in there with the committee, right? And you're counting on this person to represent you, but they're not going to represent you as well as you would. So the question becomes, how does your brand stand on its own? When they Google you, does it flow? Is it 10 results that make you look better? Or is it seven of the results aren't even you? It's another person with your name.
Mm.
So um, that I think is a big picture, man. Because of it, how we have to interact has changed.
Mm. Well, something that we've all been interacting with now is just the nonstop flow of political ads. And I can't wait until Tuesday when I don't have to see a political ad for another year. And I'm sure you feel the same way. Um, how, in your belief, how do political ads shape a campaign? And we'll go deeper into that. But let me ask you that first 10,000 foot above view, because I know you're very active on Twitter and or X in
Yeah.
terms of just making statements about each campaigns in terms of their how they're putting their message out there.
Yes.
Um, so how do you believe the political ad space truly affects the day to day of a campaign?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, I tend to think for those who are listening to radio or to Sirius XM, or on a podcast, hearing the ads without the visual, I think almost resonates more these days because you don't have competing stimuli, right? So, I think that has become almost more effective of an advertising tool in many ways for the campaigns. And then I think also the truth has become increasingly more optional. All right. So if it's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the truth doesn't matter at all, we used to be at like a 3 or a 4 most of the time, right? But now we're 5 to 9, and that's because the campaigns understand people have short attention spans. And they also understand that if you overwhelm them with information, sometimes people will just accept it because they've heard it so many times, because they're
Mm.
not doing the work of checking other sources, right? Because we've all kind of retreated into our own bubbles in many way, and aren't as willing to accept information from the other side all the time. So you can kind of get someone to almost double down, but just by feeding them something that is optionally true.
Do you think that, so let's take, the 1980s, the 1990s, even the early 2000s, there was really nothing on anywhere other than radio and television.
Yeah.
Now, right? Harris says something, Trump says something, it gets clipped, it's put on social media. All of a sudden, it's all over Instagram. How much is that really about, in your mind? Is it about the message? Is it about what's even being said, or is it what you just said that it just gets repeated over and over and over and over again?
I think it's that it gets repeated over and over again. I don't think really I don't think our brains have changed. I think just social media has brought something out about our brains that we haven't yet adjusted to. I think 40 years from now, people will be much better at this, but this is still fairly new to us, right? And our brains are evolving, dealing with it and filtering and all that stuff. So, but factually, if we go back to the 1860s, Frederick Douglass called Abraham Lincoln a stupid imbecile. Could you imagine if that was on Twitter? That would have went viral, right? And it would have caused outrage against Frederick Douglass, right? And maybe Frederick Douglass today wouldn't even be seen
Mm.
as a great historical figure in the same way. But because it was in a letter and it was one time and wasn't amplified 70,000 times, we don't know about it as much.
Mm. And I think that gives just that type of point for today. There can be feigned or faux outrage
Mhm.
or feigned or faux any type of
Yeah.
emotion, because when something is amplified, then you get a bunch of people saying the same thing. But in that vein, what I at least have noticed, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, it seems like the more we get into um, the political bases of each party, and we're in our two-party system, they no longer try. There is less of an attempt to appeal to the broader masses,
Right.
right? And maybe I'm from your point of view, they're doing, forgive me if this is the wrong term, targeted marketing. They're doing targeted marketing just to their base. And yeah, they'll sprinkle in some stuff about the broader appeal. But when you look at Trump, he's trying to play to his base. When you look at Harris, she's trying to play to her base. And their ads are targeting that. And we'll get into the negative ads. But do you have that belief that that's happening? That like either the crossover appeal or the middle, whatever you want to call it, is almost lost and forgotten about?
Well, I think the campaign gets staged a bit, right? So if you remember 2 months ago to probably up until 5, 6 weeks ago, there was some centering, right? So Harris had like some very center right ideas that she mentioned in her convention speech. And, she mentioned some after. She's talking about building a wall, essentially signing this border bill, right? You're talking about $50,000 loans, tax credits for small businesses and some other idea, and, not taxing tips. So these
Mm-hmm.
are things that are more center right. And then Trump came out with IVF being free, right? That ain't even center. That's way left, right? That's like Bernie Sanders is happy left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you saw that a little further out, but now that we're getting to the end and the election is close, it's turnout, right? So I think that the dynamics of this campaign are geared more so than even a typical campaign, because everyone knows turnout is going to be the win, lose, or draw here. In years past, the last couple of weeks, you might still be focusing on persuasion, right? But That's not what the campaigns are feeling. The campaigns are feeling whoever turns out more of her base is going to win. And so that's why the messaging has tightened up like that. And then in Harris's case, she's decided there's 15% of Republicans who were Dick Cheney and George W. Bush voters that are still around, right? And maybe they're Nikki Haley supporters. And if she can either A, get them to come to her side, less likely, or B, just get them to write someone in instead of voting for Donald Trump, that could move the needle.
Which is basically this entire election, is
Yeah.
just on the margins trying to move the needle.
Mhm.
I'm curious your take with Harris specifically. We'll get into Trump, but I'm curious your take in terms of she had essentially 3 months to just completely brand herself, even rebrand herself, right? Biden dropped out in July. So July, August, September, and October. July, August, September, October. So really it's toward the end of July. So August, September, October. So 3 months.
Yep.
How, in your mind, what kind of steps did you see as a marketing person, and how did you look at the entire essentially brand that the Harris camp put out there and her rebranding of herself?
Yeah, I mean, so she was in the 30s for her favorability before she ran. She did this kind of joy messaging and then also this kind of uplifting optimism. And it worked very well, right? I mean, like, even on the last AP press poll, Associated Press poll, she's at 51% favorability. Trump is at 40. So this tells you that generally this worked. The challenge she ran into is she dodged these interviews. And let's be honest, there's two reasons she dodged the interviews. Number one, they wanted to brand and not get labeled. And if she had said anything wrong in an interview early on, that would have became a narrative, right? Number two, she wasn't ready, right? Like normally these candidates at this stage of a cycle have a year of
Mm.
answering questions and preparing and thinking of her remarks, right? So then the criticism came, right? And couldn't hide, had to come out. And she's had some rough interviews, right? She's had some good interviews, but she's had some rough ones. And so that's the reality of having 3 months to campaign.
Is there any even notion anymore about what the with Trump, right? The Trump brand has been around for decades. And the Trump brand was essentially rebranded and turned into something else when he started running for office in 2015. Same question. Do you believe that he had to do a rebrand for this campaign? Has he done a rebrand in your mind? How do you think, in terms of your analysis for Harris, let's flip it around to Trump?
Yeah, so he's run since the day after the DNC convention when they announced the Robert F. Kennedy endorsement. A much better campaign from that point on. Before then, it wasn't that much better than 2020, and he probably was on a path to lose. But he essentially has four VPs if you think about it, right? Elon Musk, RFK, Tulsi, and JD Vance, right? They have like the Avengers essentially in terms of going out and talking for him everywhere, right? So that was a very smart campaign move. He also shrunk his message down to a couple key issues and he's reinforcing them. So there was a lot of things he did right up until this MSG event, right? And you have these speakers and men versing things that are impacting his campaign. And then I'm not sure of a reaction with wearing the sanitation worker outfits and driving garbage trucks. I'm not sure, right? Maybe that's effective, but I think that the last week, when towards the end of his campaign, going into the actual election date, he's got early voters banked. I'm sure he's going to probably end up having done better with early voters than election day voters because it seems like the campaign is crawling towards the finish line. So I think that the dynamic of a race has changed quite a bit. And I think that's because the brand hasn't been as focused the last week or so.
It's amazing that in campaigns, and a 1 week can just make a world of a difference when we're getting to these late stages.
Yeah.
And is that, do you think, Raul, that that's limited to politics? Does that come outside politics? I don't mean in this political space, but in your work. can something, a mistake or some type of misstep by a company in their branding efforts, can that create such a pushback or a clawback where there has to be a reset? Now, obviously, there's not an election within the corporate world, but is that it? Does do you see those types of things?
Yeah, so there is a really just a different way to approach crisis communication these days, for instance, right? First, the best way to approach it is to have positively communicated about your business and the leadership in advance so that when there is a crisis, people actually believe you and they don't think you're just spewing something because you're in trouble now. So we had a client a couple years ago, big private healthcare provider, and one of the senior leaders took a picture with a leader of a country that, let's say, is not on the US's good side. Okay. So lots of outrage on social media, big problems. We had to really think through how we wanted to approach it. And it's what do you tell the client that they've got to fire this guy? Do you do a press release? Do you do a press conference? What do you do? You know what we ended up deciding to do? Nothing for 48 hours. And we
Mm,
basically watched after a couple days, the social media outrage just stopped
mm,
cold turkey. So they are able to retain the guy. They dealt with him internally, and there was no blowback because there wasn't feeding the beast, right? Sometimes, like if you
hmm
just feed, but if you engage, it just makes it worse. So you have to be very strategic. Now, the CEO of Southwest did not handle things well last year during Christmas when we had that
hmm
travel issue,
Right.
right? People thought his response was callous. And that's like the worst thing you can possibly be when people are trying to travel for
Right.
the holiday season. It's a very emotional time. So Southwest paid a price for a few months. We're probably back in good shape now, but they paid a serious price for a few months because they came across as callous.
And when you say paid a price, does that mean in people's minds they're just looking for flights and they'll say to themselves, you know what? I'll spend the extra $20 and I'll go on a different flight. I'm just not doing it right now. And then eventually it'll change in their minds.
Yeah, so it's not only that, but it's also the silent disappointment of what used to be a loyal customer, right? They feel betrayed. How could they do this to
Mm,
me, right? And you build this reputation that you're the fun airline and you care about people and you have fun jokes and the stewardess are, wonderful, right? So the betrayal level also probably meant some people very intentionally went out and said, I'm not even looking at a Southwest flight option, right? I'm just
mm.
going to go to Orbitz or whoever, and I'm going to just look there and whoever has the best price, as opposed to be willing to go on Southwest. And maybe it's a little extra. I don't care. It's Southwest. So they lost that for some time period. I'm sure they've gotten it back now, but they dug themselves a grave that they didn't need to.
Hmm. Hmm. So I know you touched on this a little before, but we're in 2024. We have now AI, we have ChatGPT, we have other services. Where are we going? Where do you say, you and I, we're both
Yeah, the
still
biggest
relatively young, I'd like to think, right? But we got another 20, 25, 30 years in our respective industries. So where are we going?
Yeah, so one thing is that AI is going to take entry level associates and allow them to perform like mid level career professionals, right? So that's going to be something that we see. And I think, again, over time, that will end up making marketing and advertising and PR better eventually. Um, we're also looking at new forms of marketing. What's the next thing going to be? So, politically, text messaging is the hottest way in terms of being able to campaign donations, right? Because nobody wants to pick up a call and donate money. Nobody wants to see it in their email as much. At least younger people don't. But a text message, they have found by far that's going to be your highest conversion rate. So we'll continue to see those sort of things. And then eventually, even though it failed last year because the technology was not ready for the hype, one day we will get metaverse stuff that's real, right? We'll
Mm,
actually get something that more aligns with the hype based on the technology being there. And then, yes, we'll interact in that sort of world and there will be advertising opportunities within that. So that is where I think we'll be 5 or 6 years from now. In the meantime, I think everyone's just basically trying to fine tune what we currently have until that next level of evolution is there. And then ultimately, I'm not surprised if one day we got some brain implants or something, and you just basically, based on what you see on the street, there's going to be some advertisement directly targeted for you based on whatever your barcode says you're interested in.
where where do you see social media going?
I think it's probably a good thing that X has picked up momentum because we're headed towards a monopoly, right?
Mm,
Like when you think about Instagram and Facebook and Threads, right? The Meta essentially was positioned to really dominate. But I think because X is doing well, and certainly YouTube is doing well, and TikTok remains in the US, that would have been an issue if it doesn't. I think we are likely to see additional innovation within the social media marketplace. So I don't know what the next great thing will be. I think Snapchat failed to connect with older consumers. They didn't
mm,
figure out a path there. But I expect some sort of meaningful social innovation in the next couple of years.
mm. Well, Raul, this has been fantastic. Really, really appreciate you coming on. I know you got to jump in a couple of minutes, so I got one last question for you. What do you think is going to happen on Tuesday, November 5th?
I do not have an official prediction as of yet, and the reason why is because this is the most difficult election to predict because the polls are all over the place. I got 49 out of 50 right in 2012, 47 in 2016, and 49 again out of 2020. But I am concerned this time because you have data that's absolutely all over the place. So I'll take another look and make a decision the day before the election because it's a little bit of a tough one right now. And lastly, if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's Raoul Davis Brands on Instagram, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
And give us your X handle as well, because
X
that's where
handle
you
is
got.
CEO_branding.
All right, Raul, thank you so much for the time, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much. Cheers.